My name is Chloe Lane. I was 20 when my parents sat me down for what they called an important talk, and in the time it took for their coffee to cool, they traded my future for my brother's gamble. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. The kitchen smelled like buttered toast and something faintly sick, perfume or optimism. I never could tell which. Light folded itself against the counters, and my mother's voice came out too cheerful, the way people try to soften the edges of news you're meant to swallow. My father tapped his wedding band against his mug the way he always did when he was rehearsing a speech in private. It was the same ritual he used when he told me, years before, that life wasn't fair, but you could be fairer than others by trying harder. I believed him. I believed that if I kept my head down and did the dull work, A's, spreadsheets, evening shifts, I would not be a quiet footnote in someone else's story. I would be a heading. That morning, I ate scrambled eggs under the impression that we were a family of small promises and receipts. I had a spreadsheet, orientation dates, dorm checklist, the small dorm fridge I'd found on sale because I'd heard somewhere that college cafeterias become a sort of purgatory, and I had a job that paid in late-night wages and pride. I had done the things people who mean to keep their future tend to do. I had been the kind of daughter who avoided parties because I had deadlines and a budget, and the strange conviction that decency would be returned. My mother put down her fork and said, with the calm of someone swapping one shoe for another, "Chloe, honey, your father and I need to talk to you about something important." That should have been the signal for a long preface, a hand on the table, an apology. Instead, my father leaned forward and said, as if reading the weather, "We gave your tuition money to Lucas. His business needs it more right now." There was no build-up, no "we're sorry" that tasted like remorse. It was delivered like a fact, factual, dry, and final. I remember looking at the salt shaker because I couldn't meet their eyes. I remember my brain offering options in quick, useless flashes. Are they kidding? Is this some kind of test? And then rejecting them because the bafflement on my mother's face was not guilt. It was something closer to pride. She smiled as if this were a generous act. "You should be proud," she said. "You're supporting the family. This is what being part of something bigger than yourself looks like." I think that was when something inside me hardened the first time. The distinct small knowledge that they'd framed my erasure as virtue. They had not taken my future because they were desperate. They had done it because they believed their calculus was fair and inevitable, and because, in their view, my ambitions were optional. My older brother, Lucas, was 4 years older. He was the golden boy of our house, chaotic, persuasive, and always forgiven. When he left college after a single term and set up shop from our parents' garage, they were ecstatic. "He's finally doing it," they'd post online with proud emojis, letters of support, celebratory brunches. They funded him as though he were a project, as if devotion and money were interchangeable. Equipment, co-signed loans, cheering on social media, everything poured into his brand of vision. I'd never understood the extent of the favoritism until the morning they told me to take a gap year to figure things out. It felt like someone had shoved a wedge into the floor and I was standing on the other side of the crack. "Plenty of kids need time," my father said. "You'll find another way." He said it the way you tell a child their scraped knee will heal. There was a minute where I thought a scene would play out, a row, dramatic, perhaps the slamming of doors. I expected my corners to flare outward with anger. Instead, my voice was small and steady. I said, "So what am I supposed to do now?" My father regarded me with the irritation of a man who believed he had been reasonable, then shrugged. "Gap year, work. You're still young." I left the table without a fight. Not because I accepted it, but because I was too stunned for theatrics. I went upstairs, closed my door, and lay on the bed like the house had shrunk. The cracks in my truss turned into fissures. I did not sleep that night. I lay there and listened to the thin, polite conversations drifting up the stairs, complacent, unaware, and the glow of the streetlights painted bars across the ceiling. I packed. Not the tidy packing of someone excited about campus life, but the careful sort for someone who wanted to be gone before anyone could ask a question. 2 bags, my laptop, $2,200 from evenings at the grocery store, a rule etched onto the inside of my mind: never be someone's backup plan. I moved in with Ryan, a former coworker who'd texted back the second I asked if he had a spare bed. Ryan's place was honest. A futon that squealed when you turned over, no air conditioning, dishes that never matched, a microwave that had lost a button. It didn't matter. It was not their house. It was my first small autonomy. For the first week, my parents texted like nothing had happened. "How's the job search? Let us know if you need anything." They were testing the waters, seeing if guilt would pull me back. I didn't answer. Days became a double life. I worked weekend shifts at a sandwich shop, learned the cashier's lullaby of change and friendly small talk, and hoarded hours at the public library. I read everything I could about digital marketing, e-commerce, and online business. Videos, forum threads, free trial courses. I failed a lot. I bought inventory that sat unsold, watched ad campaigns die, and learned to eat ramen like it was a ritual of reinvention. I taught myself to be patient with iteration. Lucas was everywhere else. My mother's phone lit up with images of his workshop ribbon cutting, the kind of staged joy that looked like a lottery win. "So proud of our Lucas," the captions read. They posted glossy photos as if supporting someone's ambition should be evidence of virtue. The irony was sharp. They'd taken my tuition in the name of supporting the family's future and turned around and showcased it as if it were the seed money of an inevitable triumph. It made me nauseous, not because he was successful, but because the success had been prioritized before it existed, funded by trust that had been promised to me. I could have sulked, I could have waited a year and reapplied to scholarships and loans, but anger, for me, has always been an asking question. What now? I decided I would build where they had refused to invest, not to spite them in a cheap way, but because I needed a future that didn't live on their terms. My first wins were tiny and humiliating. 3 sales in a week on a guttering Shopify store, a $50 consulting ticket from someone who needed a quick audit, a spike of $250 when a minor blog picked up my product review. Small miracles. They tasted like the kind of air you breathe after getting out of a cramped room. That first month, my mother sent me an email with a photo of Lucas in front of a banner that read, "Launch Day, Genesis Labs." She smiled at the camera like a carnival mother. The photo landed like a slap. I laughed aloud once, loud with disbelief, and then turned back to the laptop. The grievance became fuel. If they could treat me like convenience, I would treat my future like capital. I began to learn not just how to make things work, but how to get them to stand on their own. I learned ad copy, SEO, analytics spreadsheets that felt like the maps to a different country. When I was exhausted, Ryan would find me at 2 a.m. hunched over a screen and say, "Don't forget to eat." His humor was small, but it steadied me. By the 3rd month, I had a rhythm. Nights of the sandwich shop, mornings writing product descriptions, afternoons testing headlines and watching metrics like a nervous parent. The enormous, naive plan I'd once held, the college dorm, the campus schedule, was gone. In its place was something that smelled faintly of burned coffee and late-night corrections. It lacked the ceremonial promise of a degree, but it gave me something else: control. And in quiet moments, I kept thinking of the kitchen. A salt shaker, the scrape of a spoon, my father's ring tapping. I kept the memory like a ledger. Not revenge, exactly. Not yet, but a record I could balance later. For now, it was only one thing: the decision to stop being the supporting character in a story someone else had written. It's odd how a life can split into 2 parallel versions, the one you were promised and the one you have to invent in the dark. For me, the promised version, textbook lists, dorm keys, whispered congratulations, dissolved at breakfast, and the other version began with a secondhand futon and an unresolved anger that tasted like metal. The small rituals of survival became my days. I learned to move through them like a person learning a new language. Mornings were for the sandwich shop, rolling sleeves, repeating names into orders, smiling for tips. The work was honest and anonymously brutal. The steady thump of the meat slicer, the polite small talk of customers who never asked why a 20-year-old might be carrying a man's tired eyes. Nights were for the library and the laptop, for the strange intimacy of reading other people teach you how to build a life. My learning was stubborn and greedy. I devoured free courses, scraped together forum threads, and watched tutorial videos with the intensity of a convert. SEO, affiliate models, Facebook ads. The words themselves felt like tools I could wield. I practiced writing headlines until each one had the snap of a trap. I bought cheap inventory that taught me lessons with quiet cruelty. Ads flopped. Suppliers ghosted me. I ate ramen that tasted of grit and perseverance. I learned to treat failure like a process note, not a final verdict. People who haven't been hungry often imagine hunger as something cinematic, dramatic, quick, a catalyst. But hunger for me became the slow, sharpening kind. It taught me discipline, to watch metrics at 3 a.m. and to follow a bad conversion path back to where it broke. It taught me humility, to answer a client's curt email with the kind of professional steadiness I'd once reserved for exams. It taught me stubborn imagination, to see a tiny blog post as the embryo of movement. Meanwhile, social media was a catalog of family priorities. Lucas's posts multiplied like wildfire. Slick photos at a grand opening, handshakes under balloons, congratulatory comments from relatives and their friends. My mother's captions read like press releases. "So proud of Lucas," she typed, the obligatory emojis, a small punctuation of triumph. They reframed my absence into something wholesome. Chloe, taking a gap year to find herself, they said. Generous, they called it. Noble, in a way that implied sacrifice. There were nights I wanted to call them and shout the truth. You sold me a future and called it charity, but phone calls were dangerous, too intimate for the level of betrayal I felt. Instead, I wrote cold spreadsheets, budgets, ad spend, content calendars. I refined product descriptions until they felt crisp and impossible to ignore. I made tiny agreements with myself. Ship good work, learn faster than you panic, never again assume someone will keep a promise because they say they will. Ryan kept me steady. He was a quiet humor sandwiched between the grind, an ex-grocery coworker with a soft voice and an unflashy apartment. When I first crashed on his futon, he'd shrugged and said, "Free room, casual chores." Later, when my nights were a map of frustration and midnight creativity, he'd bring back 2 sodas, sit across from me, and say, "Eat something. Even gladiators need sandwiches." He never asked for details, and that lack of curiosity felt like sanctuary. He became a witness without judgment. The first moments of real possibility were almost comically small. I remember the first week I made 3 online sales and thought I had discovered actual magic. The store was ugly, clunky images, copy with an awkward cadence, but someone clicked and money moved. I wired my half paycheck into the business and felt like a gambler, at last holding a winning card. I felt the strange exhilaration of someone who had been disbelieved discovering that belief could be built, not inherited. Then came the freelance gigs, cheap, imperfect, but they paid. An owner of a local bakery paid me $150 to audit their site. An outdoor blogger bought one of my product roundups for $40. The money wasn't life-changing, but it was validation in currency. It told me, in the bluntest way, that labor equals value and that I could make it without their permission. I spent afternoons in the library like a monk in a scriptorium. The fluorescent lights hummed, the slow Wi-Fi punished ambition. I learned to be ruthless with time. 2 hours of learning Facebook ads, 1 hour of testing headlines, the rest of the day building content that actually helped people make decisions. I favored helpfulness over hype. No more get-rich promises, no predatory dropshipping schemes. I learned to write with honesty. Product comparisons, careful reviews, real pros and cons. Those pieces were small trust-building exercises. Slowly, people started to read them. The emotional work was harder than the technical. I had to teach myself to let the indignation become a map rather than a battering ram. Vengeance wanted fireworks. I wanted leverage. The idea of leverage steadied me. If I could build a platform that made money and told truth, measured, unemotional truth, then the story would unspool on its own. It's quieter and far more effective than yelling. On a rainy evening, I went to a local panel about UX and small business marketing. It was mostly people in their 30s with polished portfolios and comfortable contempt for hustle culture. I sat in the back, half interested and half skeptical, and watched how people spoke when they assumed you weren't in the room to be listened to. There was a man there. I'll call him Owen, though I didn't know then how much his life would rub against mine. He had a practical way of explaining design decisions, and he laughed at the right moments. He was not central. He was a silhouette in my peripheral vision. Still, I noticed him the way people notice useful tools: unobtrusive, thoughtful, something to remember. The first real break came when a small outdoor blog picked up one of my product reviews. Overnight, traffic tripled. A $250 affiliate check felt like vindication for nights of cheap coffee and stubborn repetition. It wasn't global success, it was oxygen. That week I felt, briefly, less like a ghost and more like a person with momentum. I started writing methodically. I posted case studies that were intentionally dry, no melodrama, just data and process. Each piece closed with a line that became my quiet motto: no degree, no assistance, no excuses. It was surgical and unromantic. It also resonated. The first time someone emailed me to say my piece helped them decide on a camping stove, I cried in a kitchen that wasn't mine. It was an odd, private mixture of relief and grief. At home, their story continued without me. The family narrative shifted so easily into commodity. They framed my absence as bravery, his adversity as destiny. They were performing the story they preferred. It taught me something essential. Narratives can be stolen only if you let them be. So I chose to write mine where it would matter, on pages people search for, in emails they open, on a modest blog that would one day collect more than pity. I did it with the slow ferocity of someone reshaping a life from the inside out. The anger that started as a hot flare had become something else, an instrument. It had edges, but it could be wielded with care. I was still hungry. I was still tired. But for the first time, I was learning not only to survive, but to build a structure that could not be stolen again. Success, when it finally arrived, did not walk through the door with trumpets. It came in quietly, a soft notification ping at 2 a.m, the first time I saw a single day's revenue cross $12,200. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. It felt unreal, like watching someone else's bank account. But it was mine. Mine in a way nothing in that house had ever been. I didn't sleep that night. I watched orders roll in like a tide I'd been waiting years for. Every click felt like justice. Small, steady, cumulative. What I didn't know then was that while my life was climbing rung by rung, Lucas's business was swallowing itself whole. I'd been gone 9 months when the first cracks showed. My cousin sent a screenshot to our group chat, the one my parents thought I wasn't in anymore. A photo of Lucas's store, lights off in the middle of the afternoon. A handwritten sign on the door. Closed for inventory. Thank you for understanding. Understood by whom? Not the customers, not the neighbors, and certainly not me. A week later, there was another picture, this time of the sign replaced with temporarily closed for renovation. Renovation is a generous word when you haven't paid rent in 3 months. At home, however, the official storyline, crafted carefully by my parents, was different. Business always dips a little in the first year, my mother said in a Facebook comment. But they're fighters. We raised fighters. Fighters. They hadn't raised me to fight. They'd raised me to fold. They thought they had anyway. It wasn't until my aunt's birthday dinner, an overly polite tradition I still attended out of habit, that the truth spilled. I wasn't prepared for how loudly a room could go quiet. We were all seated around the long table at my aunt's house. The kind of dinner with too many candles and not enough emotional distance. My parents sat stiffly across from me, like I was a guest they regretted inviting. Then my uncle said it, in his booming, oblivious voice. "So, Chloe, I hear your blog is doing well. 6 figures now?" Forks froze midair. My parents went statue still. Lucas's jaw tightened. I hadn't told anyone those numbers. I hadn't even told Ryan. I wanted to melt into my chair. Or maybe laugh, or maybe finally say the truth outright. You bet against the wrong child. Before I could answer, my mother cut in sharply. People exaggerate online. She said people like it was a slur. My father added, "A website isn't a real business, not like your brother's. He has a storefront." Ah, yes, the holy storefront. The altar at which they'd sacrificed my tuition. I felt the pressure of every unspoken thing in my chest. Every night I'd worked, every invoice I'd sent, every order I'd packed until my hands went numb. Every moment I'd swallowed the loneliness instead of calling home. But I didn't say any of that. I simply smiled, a slow, careful smile, and replied, "Well, real or not, it pays for my rent, insurance, taxes, travel, and savings. I'm managing." A silence settled over the table, heavy, Uncomfortable because managing meant I didn't need them, and independence is louder than any argument. Lucas stabbed at his steak like it had personally wronged him. My mother's lips tightened into a thin, brittle line. And my father, he looked at me, really looked, and I saw something I had never witnessed on his face before. Fear. Not fear for me, fear of me. Fear of what I might say. Fear of what I had become without them. Fear that the child they'd written off had outgrown the script entirely. But the real blow came days later. Another cousin, messy, drunk, too honest, sent me a voice note at midnight. Bro, I overheard your parents talking. They said Lucas's business is almost done. Debt everywhere. Your dad had to co-sign a loan. They're panicking. I sat up in bed, panicking. About him, not about me. Not about the kid they'd pushed out of her future. Not about the daughter they'd left to reinvent herself on a futon. Yet somehow, despite everything, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt clarity. Clarity about who they were. Clarity about who I no longer was. And clarity about one final truth. They didn't choose Lucas over me because he had potential. They chose him because they believed I would never rise high enough for my fall to matter. They invested in him because they assumed I was the safe sacrifice. They gambled my life because they were certain I would lose quietly. They were wrong, and the collapse of their chosen golden child hadn't even fully begun. But it would, and when it did, they would have to face the truth they had spent years avoiding. The daughter they discarded became someone they couldn't dismiss, and the son they glorified became someone they couldn't save. The next time I saw Lucas, it wasn't at a family gathering. It was on Instagram, his grand reopening post, a glossy photo of the storefront, freshly painted, strategically lit, empty chairs lined up neatly inside. The caption, "Back and better than ever. Thanks to everyone for your patience. Hashtag new beginnings." I scrolled past, but my heart didn't skip. It didn't even beat faster. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. I didn't need to scroll for proof. I had already lived the reality. I had built something real, while the store, like a paper castle, had crumbled quietly before being patched up for show. Then came the calls. First, my parents, polite, careful, like predators testing the waters. "Chloe, we wanted to check in. How's the business?" "Fine," I said, short, sharp. "Are you managing everything okay?" I let the pause linger, longer than comfortable, long enough for them to realize I didn't need their guidance, their money, or their approval. "Yes, everything's under control," I said finally. "Good," my mother replied, and I could hear the forced cheer in her voice. "Good." The ellipsis carried more weight than words could. The real storm hit when Lucas's bankruptcy finally leaked. Not the fancy, curated kind you post online, the ugly kind. Court filings, debts called in, suppliers unpaid. Photos of the store's grand reopening had been doctored with rented furniture and borrowed lighting. In reality, the shelves were empty, the registers silent. It was poetic, almost cruel, like the universe handing out delayed justice in installments. And yet I didn't gloat. Instead, I felt liberated, because every bill I'd paid, every sleepless night I'd endured, every order I'd fulfilled with trembling hands had built a fortress around me. I had survived the negligence, the favoritism, the betrayals. I had survived my parents' judgment and Lucas's envy. I had survived everything they thought would break me. And now I had proof. Proof that survival didn't have to be quiet. Proof that success didn't have to be loud. Proof that being abandoned doesn't mean being defeated. The final confrontation came months later. My father, his suit pressed, his hair slicked back, leaned against my doorframe one morning. I had just opened a package, an order from a client overseas. "We need to talk," he said. "About?" I asked, setting the box down. "Everything. Your business, your brother." I didn't interrupt, I just waited. "We may have underestimated you," he continued. "We didn't realize." I held up my hand. "You didn't realize I was capable of standing on my own," I said softly. "That's all you need to know." He flinched, not because of anger or frustration, but because he saw it. The quiet, unshakable truth. I didn't need them. I never did. He left without another word. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't fully understood until now. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Lucas's empire had collapsed. My parents' favoritism had unraveled, and I had done nothing but keep moving forward, one decision, one order, one day at a time. The $500,000 in revenue wasn't just money. It was a symbol, a monument to everything I had lost. and everything I had rebuilt. And for the first time, I felt the strange, exhilarating taste of freedom. Untouchable, undeniable, unshakable. Because life had taken away everything I thought I needed, and in return, it gave me everything I was strong enough to earn. Months later, I stood in my office, the sunlight spilling across the polished wood floor. Every corner of the space reminded me of the journey, the sleepless nights, the mistakes, the small victories no one saw but me. The walls weren't decorated with inherited advice or reminders of my parents' wisdom. They were mine. Certificates, client letters, sketches of ideas I'd fought to make real. My phone buzzed. Another message from Lucas, apologetic, clumsy, almost desperate. I messed up. I'm sorry for everything. I stared at it for a long time, and then, almost casually, I deleted it. No reply, no satisfaction, no need to gloat. The past had no hold on me anymore. Later that week, I received a letter from my parents. Thick, formal, begging me to reconsider our relationship, your brother. I scanned it. The same old appeals, the same old favoritism, the same old hollow promises. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer I would never open again. Because the truth was simple. I didn't need them. I never had. And now I had built a life where I could thrive on my own terms. I turned back to my desk where a new blueprint lay for a second business venture. An international expansion I had been quietly planning while the world believed I was just surviving. This time, there would be no distractions, no unhelpful advice, no hidden grudges. Just me, my team, and the future I was creating from scratch. And as I looked out the window at the city bustling below, I realized something vital. Freedom wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. Freedom was the quiet power of living your life exactly the way you chose. Lucas's downfall, my parents' indifference, my brother's failures, they were nothing more than background noise. What mattered was this. I had survived the storm, and now I was steering my own ship. A small smile curved my lips. Not smug, not bitter, just calm, certain, free. Because the past, no matter how loud or painful, could no longer touch me. And the future, that was mine to write.